I'm Pat from the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore in Maitland, Florida, and today I'm going to instruct you on your new babylock-victory serger. In this video, I'm going to go over the accessories. I'm going to go over all the buttons and features in this machine. I'm going to show you how to thread it. I'm going to show you how to use your quick reference threading chart. And at the end, I'm going to inspire you to take your machine to another level where you can use decorative threads and stitches that you may not know how to use, and you could create some really colorful projects like the ones I have in front of me. Now let's take a look at the babylock accessories that come with your Victory serger. So I'm going to start by telling you that you should go on the babylock.com website and register your machine with Babylock. That way you'll get all kinds of newsletter, you'll be on their newsletter list, you'll know about new products. So go ahead and do that first. And then also, while you're on the Babylock website, I would encourage you to sign up for their 60-day trial of their SewEd online classes. So you would go, these are the instructions, you would go to babylock.com/60-day trial and fill out the online form and click sign up for trial. And what that does for you is that it will give you access to Babylock's video vault of really super classes. So in there, the Victory is covered with great classes, and you'll also have access to other products and other information and classes that Babylock has in their video vault. So we always want to know more, right? So make sure that you start off by doing that. Okay, let's move on. So of course we have an instruction manual, which I have here open, and it's a very easy read. It's a great instruction manual. They cover the machine really well. So again, take a look at it. And I'm going to go over the accessories that are listed here that come with your machine and explain to you what they're for. So of course you've got the manual, you've got your quick reference threading guide, which make sure you hang on to it and keep it by the side of your machine because you're going to be using that all the time. Then of course you've got your foot control, comes with the machine, and then there's a little needle inserter on one end. It has a little hole. It's so small you probably can't see it, but you can insert the needle in there, and it helps you to put the needle inside the machine. See, there's a little hole. The hole is big enough for you to put the needle in, so that when you go to change needles and you want to insert a needle, you would use this. There's a clear diagram of it in your instruction manual, and then also there's a little brush on the other end so that you can keep the inside of your machine clean. And then we have needle clamp screws, these two little screws in this little bag. You may wonder what those are for. These are the little screws that are on top of your needles in your machine. In other words, if you were to go to change your needle and you take the screw out too much or it vibrates loose, you have a replacement for those little screws in there. So make sure you keep your eyes on those. Okay, so moving along, we have a package of assorted needles. We also have a medium screwdriver and a large screwdriver. We have a pair of tweezers, which are very valuable to have. When I teach serging classes, I always encourage you to bring your tweezers and have your tweezers by your machine. Sometimes you may need help threading the needle or just getting into those areas where your fingers don't fit. So always make sure you have your tweezers. And then there is a replacement for your upper cutting blade. That's in this little bag here. You have another larger screwdriver. You have a looper threading tool. So in this little bag, there is a, can you see it in there? Yeah. There's a very fine coil of wire in there. One end of the wire has an eye, like the eye of a needle. The other end is just a point. What you're going to use this for is when you are threading through your upper or your lower looper portal, a thread that just won't jet air thread through, whether it's because maybe it's too heavy or it doesn't have enough substance, maybe something like a soft lock thread, something that just has no substance and you've tried threading it and it just won't go through. So then you would use your little wire threader. You would put the point, you would set up your machine for threading, and you would put the point of your wire threader through the portal and push it all the way through. And then before the eye of the wire threader goes through your portal, thread your thread through, and you'll see that the wire will come out the other end through your looper eye. You can grab it and pull, and it'll pull your difficult to thread through your tubular loopers. Again, there's a good description of that in your instruction manual, but don't get frustrated with that kind of thread, because one of the beauties of using a serger and having loopers is that you can feed through heavier thread, maybe like a 12 weight or difficult threads that normally you wouldn't be able to use on your sewing machine. So let's move on here. So after your looper threading tool, that's what I just talked to you about, you have thread nets. So thread nets are used to wrap around difficult thread. So you can see that they're very soft and they're very long. Sometimes you can double it depending on what you're doing. You can double it over, and what you would do is you would get thread that's very difficult. And when I say difficult, sometimes some threads are slippery, so they have a tendency to slip off the spool. So what you can do is you could wrap this around it, and then you would put this on your machine, and you can see, I always do the test. I take my thread and I pull, and you see how nice that feeds off. So it's not slipping and sliding down your spool, and it won't get wrapped around your thread guide or anything. So that's what your thread nets are for, and it comes with, I believe, 4 of them. Also with your thread net, just another tip, is that you could use it singly if you want. When you use a thread net, sometimes when you put it on there double, what it does is add tension to your thread, and it might tighten it a little bit. So if you want, you can leave it single, but I would encourage you to use them on difficult fabrics, but to also test and see how it comes off. Okay, so after the thread nets, we have the spool caps. Here are the spool caps, and you can see that I've got 4 here that are different to these. So this goes on top. This one here, the ones that have the sponge, I love these. I actually use these quite often because you can put this, you would take this cone holder off. These are only for holding cones. So if you're going to put different threads on your serger and not cones, go ahead and carefully remove those from your machine. And if you were going to use, for instance, Ricky Tim's dazzle thread, make sure that the little groove that your thread is caught in down here goes down. And then, having removed this from my thread holder, I would put this on, and then I would sit this on top, and so my thread would come off like that. Can you see how nice that's coming off? And it's sitting on a nice little pedestal, so it's helping to for my thread not to slip off or get caught in any little grooves. So again, very useful those are. So those are called the sponge. These are the spool caps. These are the sponge discs. I also get a little Allen wrench. We have the cone holders that I just talked to you about. Only use these in your cones. And then we have a machine cover which is very nice, a dust cover to keep your machine clean. And then we have the standard presser foot that comes on the machine. Now let's take a close look at your new babylock-victory serger. So coming over here to the machine, you can see that my 4 threads are on the thread stand and that I have an antenna. It's important that your thread antenna, so to speak, is lifted all the way up. You'll see that over here I've got thread guides where my threads snap in before they go down into the channels and down into the inside of the machine, so to speak. Okay, so this thread here is my left needle, or overlock needle 1. This one here is overlock needle 2. This is my upper looper thread, and this is my lower looper thread. When I say upper looper thread, I mean the thread that shows as a loop, that travels as a loop on the top of my fabric. My lower looper does the same thing, but it's on the underside of my fabric. So coming around the machine towards the right side, I'm just going to turn the machine a little bit so that you can see. I have got a storage compartment here where normally you can storage your needles, or you'll find that there's some accessories that we're going to go over at the end of the video. I'll show you what the accessories are for. So there's a nice storage compartment on the side. It is important that when you open this up or you use it, that you close it up again, because it might affect your tension when you're serging if you leave this swung open. So always make sure you close it after you've opened it. Now right underneath, I should say, right under here is my wheel. Now you'll notice that there's some markings here. So when you want to thread your needles, either overlock needle 1 or 2, if you line up, and always on a serger, you always need to turn the wheel towards you. But you can line these up, and what that does is that it puts your needles at the highest position so that it's easier to thread them, either using your needle threader that comes on the machine or threading them with a different kind of needle threader. So traveling around from over here, the next thing we encounter here is our differential feed. And there's a lever here that you can raise up or all the way down. And what this does is normally you want to keep this on N for normal. What your differential feed does is adjust the feeding or the speed at which the fabric feeds through your machine. So in other words, your feed dogs are underneath your presser foot here. And this machine has 2 sets of feed dogs that work independently. So if you were to take your presser foot off your machine, you would see that 2 sets of feed dogs. So when you have this at normal, your feeding system, both your feed dogs are working at the same speed. They're feeding at the same rate at the same time. So if I was to adjust this up, I could go all the way up to 2. You can see that there's a little picture on top of the 2 that shows arrows going in. So what that is indicating is that the higher up you go, the faster your front feed dogs are working, and therefore you can gather with this machine. So I would encourage you to put a piece of fabric underneath there, set your machine for a 4-thread serge, and then move this all the way up so you understand that your front feed dogs, if you put this at 2, are working twice as fast as your back set of feed dogs. So it's pushing in more fabric and therefore gathering. And of course you have different increments that you can go up. So if, for instance, you're serging on a knit, maybe on a difficult fabric, and you find that after you've serged, and I would always encourage you to test on a piece of fabric if you're not sure if it's going to stretch or not. I would, if my fabric was stretching as it came out from underneath my foot, what I would do is I would adjust my feed dogs up maybe 1 or 2 increments. And so the front set of feed dogs is going to feed a little bit faster, so it'll avoid stretching. Now, if you were to come down or go in the opposite direction, what it's doing is that it's relaxing the fabric a little bit more. So it's the opposite. So if you were to serge, say you serged a rolled hem, and you find that as the rolled hem comes off from behind your presser foot and it seems like it's pulling in, you could go the opposite way, and your front feed dogs will work a little slower than your back feed dogs. So the way to learn this is to test it with different pieces of fabric. But generally you want to keep this on N. And I would also encourage you, when you sit down to your serger to serge, that you always double check that your differential feed is at N, because sometimes you could maybe move this lever and then you're not going to be very successful in your serging if you don't notice that. Okay, so now moving across, I'm going to just go ahead and open my door here, and I can also, by sliding this over, open this door here. Now you can see the inside of this serger, and as you can see, it's very unlike other sergers that have a lot of hooks underneath here and are very intimidating. This machine has jet air threading, and I'm going to show you how to do that in 1 minute. But first of all, let me close it back up. This here is your differential feed lever. Some people get confused because when you take down this door, so to speak, there's another lever here. This lever here is for jet air threading your threads through your portals. So don't get confused between those two. Okay, when I say portals, I mean these little holes here through which your upper looper thread goes through, and this is your lower looper thread. You'll see that underneath these portals, there's like a selector here. So what does this selector do? Under the selector, you'll see that there's a U to the left and there's an L to the left. And there's an arrow pointing in both directions. So this is where I would tell the machine what thread, what looper thread I want to thread, because this machine threads 1 looper at a time. So if I wanted to thread my upper looper, I would select with my selector the portal that I want to thread. When I'm done threading my upper looper thread, I could slide this over, and now I'm telling my machine I want to thread my lower looper. Okay, so down here there's a little button, and there's also like a little slide lever with an arrow. So first of all, I'm going to open this back up so you can get a good view under here. So when I want to thread the machine, I need to tell my machine that I want to thread it. And how do I do that? I can touch this button and turn my hand wheel towards me, and you'll see the mechanism. My loopers are going up and down, and what happens is that as soon as my tubular loopers line up, it locks. My machine is locked. My loopers here have locked, or my tubes have locked into position for me to be able to thread it. When I'm done, and the machine locks up because it knows I want to thread it. Now, when I'm done with my threading, I need to unlock it. So what I would do is I would slide this over, and as you can see the action taking place right here, as I slide this over, my tubes are going back into position, and now my machine is unlocked and it's ready for serging. So I'm going to show you how to thread it in a minute when I'm done kind of traveling around the other features of the machine. So moving over here, I'm just going to line these up. we're talking about loopers. This here is my upper looper, and then my lower looper is underneath. Over here, I'm going to turn the machine a little bit so that you get a clearer view. Over here, you can see this is my knife. So this is what cuts my fabric when I'm serging. Probably 99% of the time that you're using your serger, you're going to leave your knife up and cutting. There's very rare or few times that you would want to lock your blade. But if you want to lock your blade, what you would do is there's a little kind of a button here, and you can see that I can turn it. You see what's happening here? It pulled my blade down and it locks it. So I'm just going to turn my wheel towards me, and now you'll see that now my blade is locked down, and on top of my little button here it says lock. When you want to unlock your blade, you're going to turn this again towards you, and then you're going to take your hand wheel and turn it once towards you, and it's enabled my blade. So now my blade is coming back up and it's ready for action. Okay, so moving behind my blade lock and unlock, this here is my stitch width, and down here the bigger dial is my stitch length. I'm going to turn this just a little bit more so you can see on my stitch width that there's a little picture here that indicates that the more I turn my wheel this way, my stitches would be wider. On here, I have two settings, standard and rolled hem. So I'm going to get to that in 1 second. Let's come up here. When you turn this dial, this is, as you can see up here, what it's actually doing is that it's moving your blade in and out. We're going to get a closer look so you can see what it's doing. So this is moving my blade in and out, and I'm going to talk about the threading chart in 1 second, because a chart comes with this machine that tells you, depending on what stitch you want, exactly where you should put your setting or your dials, or it indicates the preferred place to put it depending on what you're doing. So on this little dial, there's two sets of numbers for every setting. So the larger of the numbers is indicating, let me turn it this way 1 second so you can see. So as I turn it, for instance here, it says 6.5, and then underneath it, this setting is 4.0. So the 6.5 is the measurement in millimeters from your left needle to your blade, and the 4 is the measurement from your right needle to the blade. I'm going to turn it this way so you understand what I'm saying. So your left needle here, or overlock needle 1, is farther away in distance to the blade than this one. So these are two settings on one place, so to speak, on that dial. And then down here, and as you can see, as the numbers get larger, the blade moves away from my needle. So in other words, the distance or the width is getting wider. I'm going to set it back. Now, on the dial underneath, it's under standard. Remember I told you here on this large dial, there's a setting that says standard, and there's another setting that says rolled hem. I'll turn it a little bit. So standard is standard serging. So think length on your sewing machine, because I don't want you to get confused with this or intimidated. So, you know, just like when you're sewing on your sewing machine, you may set your stitch length at 2 for a very short stitch, 2.5, or 3 if you want your stitch a little bit longer. So that's what this dial does. So I generally leave my setting, if I'm doing a 4 thread overlock. I generally leave it at a stitch length of about 4. But again, I'm going to go over the chart in 1 second, and it's going to have a recommended setting. But once you understand how this dial really works, you'll understand that the longer the length, in other words, if I take my stitch length all the way up to 4, my stitches are further apart going this way. So if I was to be using a heavy thread, maybe a 12-weight thread in my upper looper, or I'm serging maybe on a really heavy fabric, I want to lengthen my stitch length just as I would on my sewing machine. So I like the fact that I can customize my stitch length to accommodate the weight of my fabric and the weight of my thread so that my stitch is looking good. Okay, so let's turn this dial. I'm turning the stitch length dial, and I turned it all the way to 1, and now you'll see I can keep turning, and all of a sudden, can you see I've got a different color, and over here it says rolled hem. So what is this doing? What actually happened here when I did this, and I don't know whether you'll be able to see it on camera, but generally on a serger, can you see what's happening here? Let's try to focus in a little bit. There's a little finger that's coming back here. Can you see there's some action going on underneath here? So underneath the needles are some little, I'm going to call them fingers for lack of a better word right now, but this is actually called your stitch finger, where your stitches are formed underneath your needles. So when I want to do a rolled hem, and I'm going to show you what a rolled hem looks like. Generally it's used maybe on a napkin or on a scarf. Your width of your stitch is very narrow. So when I do this, when I turn my dial to where it says rolled hem, it pulls away my stitch finger. So now my stitch finger is much narrower, and my stitching is forming almost on a needle plate as opposed to a wider stitch finger. So I'm going over these features, and maybe you don't understand them in the beginning, but you'll get to understand it once you start using your machine and seeing what it does. So on the rolled hem section of the machine, just like on the standard section, I have a 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it works in the same way. This is your stitch length. So if you want to do a rolled hem on something very lightweight and you want your stitching very, very close together, you could bring it down almost to a 1. And so your stitch length would be very close together, and it would be beautiful. But you can also spread them apart. So I'm just going to go back to standard a second. You're going to see it's going to put my stitch finger back. So now I know I'm going to create a wider serging stitch. Okay, so I've talked to you about these 3. Now let's just take another look up here. So these are my feed dogs underneath my foot, and as you can see, sergers have a very long foot. They reach out and grab the fabric and really have a good feeding system. I'm going to bring my needles, I'm going to line up my green lines here on my wheel and bring my needles up to the highest position. If you want to change your foot, you can raise your presser foot on the back, and then there's a little lever that you would push, and you could, actually I'll go ahead and do it. So I push the little lever, and if you want to take the foot out, what you're going to do is you're going to swipe it off sideways. So, and when you go to put your foot back on, you're going to put it up back on the same way, and you would, can you see there's like a little rod? See this here? This is where the machine attaches to the foot, so I would make sure that I place that underneath here, the little arm that reaches out, and then snap it down, and before you use it, make sure that it's well and truly on there. Now I'm going to show you how to thread your serger. So let's take a look. Again, to recap, this is overlock needle 1, overlock needle 2, which is my left needle and my right needle. And then this is my upper looper thread, and this is my lower looper thread. This machine, you can thread in any order, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to start with overlock needle 1, which is my red thread and my left needle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my red thread and I'm going to snap it in the thread guide that's behind the track. I'm going to drop it in the track. Now you always need to make sure that your presser foot is up. Sometimes on sergers you can't really tell if your foot is up or down. So make sure your presser foot is up. As you come down this track, there's a little hook right at the bottom of it. So you want to swipe it behind there and then come over, and there's another hook here. So I swiped it behind there, and then I'm going to come up, across and down, and now here on top of my needles there's another little hook. So I'm just going to put it behind there. Now as soon as you're done going through the actual machine, you could come to the back and drop your presser foot, because then you have more room to move or to see what you're doing here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is you want to make sure that your green lines on your hand wheel on your side are lined up. That means that my needles are in the highest position for threading. It also means that my needles are in the correct position for using my needle threader. So this here, this little slide is your needle selector. So if I slide this to the left, it means I want to thread my left needle. If I slide it to the right, it's going to thread my right needle. I'm going to leave it on left. Okay, so what am I going to do next? I am going to come over here, and there's a little lever here. I'm going to pull my little lever down, and I'm going to get my tweezers here. It's very important. With sergers, it's easier to use the tweezers that come with the machine. So I'm going to guide that across. My thread jumped out. Okay, and now it is threaded, and my left needle is threaded. Now we're going to go ahead and thread the right needle. I'm just going to pull my thread through, and sometimes it can get caught in your needle threader a little bit, but all you need to do is, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and thread my right needle. You grab that thread and just pull it back. Okay, so my right needle is my green thread. I'm going to do the same thing. Remember to lift your presser foot up. I'm going to snap my thread down in there. Make sure you hear it click. Come down, swipe it across. Now there's a larger hook down here. You're not going to swipe it behind that. You're going to swipe it behind the smaller hook up here. You're going to follow the same thread path that your red thread for your overlock needle 1 went through. I'm going to go up, down, and around, and I'm going to go behind the hook. And now I'm going to drop my presser foot so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to select my right needle with my needle selector. I'm going to come over here and with my tweezers, so hopefully you can see it on camera, I'm going to swipe it from left to right across the front, and it's threaded. I'm just going to catch this little loop. If it's a little bit long, you can just cut it, and then you want to swipe your thread back behind your needles, and I'm going to do that with my tweezers. Very valuable to have. The machine comes with tweezers. Okay, so those are my 2 needle threads threaded. So then the next one, while I'm down here and talking about needles, I wanted to show you that there is a screw on top of the left and one on top of the right. It's actually marked L and R, left, right. So if you need to change your needle, you can just loosen the screw and the needle will drop out. There's also a little window up here through which you can see the top of the needle. It's very important that when you change your needles, that the needle goes all the way up, as far up as it'll go, and that it's visible in that little window. And yes, the left needle normally is a little bit higher up than your right needle. Okay, now let's keep going. Let's come over and thread my upper looper. So my upper looper is my brown one here. So I'm going to snap it down in the track. I'm going to lift my presser foot up again, and I'm going to come down. This is left needle, right needle, upper looper, lower looper. So I'm going to come down here. Now, I have to tell my machine that I want to thread my loopers. And in the beginning of the video, I showed you, you touch this button and turn your hand wheel towards you slowly until your loopers here, your tubes line up and it locks. Okay, so now upper looper, I've got to select here my upper looper portal. I'm going to slide it over. I am going to take approximately 12 inches of thread, and just with my fingers, you need a nice clean cut tip. You're going to insert about 1/2 inch in your upper looper portal. You can use your tweezers just to insert it in, and then you're going to push this lever down, and I don't know whether you saw it, but it threaded my upper looper just like that. It's my upper looper thread. So you want to cut this now. You leave about 4 inches just hanging there, and now I want to thread my lower looper. So I'm going to select my lower looper portal. I'm going to come over here and get my blue thread. I'm going to snap it down in there, come down and behind the little hook. I need about the same amount of thread, about 12 inches. If you've got a raggedy end, make sure that you cut it so you have a nice sharp tip. And then I'm going to get my tweezers so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take this and I'm going to insert it in there. And when you're threading your loopers, you want to make sure that your thread isn't caught up on anything down here. So I'm going to pump there, and there it is. It came right through. The wonders of jet air threading, how easy it is. So I'm going to cut my thread. Now I have to tell my machine I've finished threading it. And how do I do that? I slide the lever over and I unlock this, so now my machine is unlocked. So the next thing I need to do, I've got it all threaded up and ready to go. I need to tell it what stitch I want to do. And how do I do that? Over here, I have a stitch selector. So this is where I talk to the machine and tell it what stitch I want. So when you put this stitch selector on A, you're telling the machine, I want to do a 4-thread overlock. And generally when you have it on A, you're always going to have your left needle in. Your left needle being your widest, giving it your widest stitch. Okay, so now I am going to bring in my threading chart. So this is like the Bible for your machine. You're not expected to remember all the stitches that the machine does, all the settings, because you want to be able to customize and do the stitch that you want, right, according to what project you're doing. So it's called the Victory Quick Reference Threading Guide. So this you should always keep next to your machine. So let's start off by looking at the left. Now that I've talked to you about the machine, this should be more familiar to you. So it's telling you that the needles, if you want to do a 4-thread overlock, you're going to use your left and your right needle. Underneath here, it shows you a little diagram of what that stitch is going to look like. And it's all color-coded so that it's easier for you to understand how the stitch is forming, what it's going to look like, and what threads or what stations, so to speak, on your threading guide you're going to use. So you're going to use your left and your right needle. Your stitch length, it has a suggested length of between 2.5 and 3.5. So your length is your large wheel down here. The next thing we're looking at coming along here is your stitch width. This is your smaller dial, and again, it's recommending between 6.0 and 7.5. So that's the smaller wheel of the two, so you can set it at that. And then here, very importantly, it's telling you where to put your stitch selector, and your stitch selector is this little dial here. So for a 4-thread overlock, that's all you need to do, and that's how we set up the machine right now. So let's just move over a second to the next one. A 3-thread overlock wide. A 3-thread means, if you look at this diagram here, that they are eliminating one of your needle threads, because actually in serging and in serger stitches, what's actually locking your stitch together are your needle threads. Your looper threads are laying on the fabric and locking on the edge, but your needle threads are locking your stitches together. Okay, so if you want a 3-thread overlock wide, you're going to use your left needle. You're going to put your stitch length recommended between 2 and 3. If you want to put it on 4, you can. Your stitch width would be 7.5, so that's the smaller little wheel, so to speak, that I showed you down here, the smaller. I don't know if we can, so that's your stitch width. And then your stitch selector here is going to stay on A. So what you're eliminating is your right needle. And it is very important that when it tells you use your left needle, that you take your right needle out of the machine. Don't leave it in and think I can just leave it in and just not thread it. You do not want to do that, and you also want to unthread or take your right needle spool of thread off the machine so it doesn't marry or get tangled with any of your other threads. It's also giving you a little diagram here. They really do a very good display here in showing you exactly how to set up your machine. Okay, I'm going to keep moving down. 3-thread overlock narrow. You're using your right needle. So you're taking your left needle out. Your stitch length is suggested 2.5 to 3.5 stitch width. And this is what is changing. You're taking out a needle and you're putting your stitch selector here on B. Remember, this is where I'm telling my machine what stitch I want to do. Okay. So 3-thread overlock narrow hem, you're going to use your right needle. You're going to put your stitch length between 0.75 and 1.5 R. And this is very important here. Next to your stitch length, can you see there's a tiny little R? That means rolled. So and you're putting your stitch selector on C. What's the meaning? Why are they putting that little R there for rolled? Because down here on your stitch length, remember I showed you that if you turn this dial, you can turn it to rolled. And so now the difference in your stitch is that when you see an R, it's going to roll your little hem. In other words, you're not going to have a raw edge on the edge. You're going to have, it's going to be rolled. Okay, so basically these are different stitches that you can do. You can do a 3-thread rolled edge. You can do a 3-thread flat lock. I would encourage you to try these out. These are very cool stitches, a 2-thread flat lock wide. Be careful with some of these. Be very aware of where they're putting the thread, because sometimes to be able to get specific stitches, they're jumping into another track. But it's kind of cool that there are these different stitches for doing decorative stitching on your machine. There's another thing that I want to point out coming over here, and this is something that I did not show you on the machine yet. When you, let me find a stitch that uses it. There is a little looper, let me see here. Just find the right one. Okay, here, you see this little diagram here? If you want to do this 2-thread blanket stitch, as you go across here, you'll understand left needle, length 4, width 7.5, stitch selector on A. But what is new to you here is this little diagram of this. This is what the diagram is showing you. I'm going to put that down. So this here, I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to grab the tweezers. Can you see that I can actually slide this over and swing this up? Can you see this? Okay, so as I swing this up and over, what happens is there's a little hook right on the end here, and it's hooking into the eye of my upper looper. This is my upper looper. So when you see a little diagram like this, it's only for very specific stitches. When you see that, it means that you're going to swing that over, and essentially what that's doing is that it's disabling, so to speak, your upper looper so that the machine can stitch a different stitch, which certainly a 2-thread blanket stitch is a very unusual stitch. But always remember that if you engage this, that you need to come back and swing it, be delicate with it, swing it back up and then over and put it back into position there. Another thing that I want to point out while we're down here is here it tells you what kind of needles to use. So if you need to buy extra needles, it's a 130-705. Just in case you forget, the information is right there. Now I want to give you some inspiration using a stitch on your serger that people very seldom use because they don't know what to do with it, or maybe you think that a serger is only maybe good for constructing a garment or finishing edges, and it's not. You can use your serger for decorative stitching and for being creative in your crafts. So take a look at this. In front of me, I have a table runner that I'm working on, and you can see that I have decorative stitching on top here using Ricky Tim's Dazzle threads from Superior Threads. Here I have a couple of other samples. This is something that I'm working on, and you can see how beautiful this is, stitching my strips of batik together. And then this is the 2-thread, let me show you on my threading guide, the 2-thread flat lock wide. This is the threading guide for it, and this, when I was showing you how to thread, this is one of the stitches that is unusual in that you would use your subsidiary looper and slide that over. So we're actually only using 2 threads, and it has a different threading pattern to what normally how you would thread your serger. So take a close look at that if you want to do this. But anyhow, getting back to this, you can see the right side has my serging stitch, so to speak. But when I flip it over, look at how beautiful it is on the other side. It's like a ladder stitch. And here I've constructed some products or projects using that. And you can see this is a little boxy bag using batiks, and I've used the other side of the stitch. Here I've got another one. So it's very, very decorative, and you can put through your looper a heavier thread if you like. Here I have another one. This is my Christmas one. It's very, very pretty, and actually on this one I used a Babylock exclusive wave stitch. So this stitch here that I attached my zipper with is not available on your Babylock-Victory, you would need to trade up to the Babylock Accolade to be able to use a wave stitch. So all kinds of fun projects that you can use. I had somebody make a comment the other day to me when I was talking about my table runners and my bags and stuff, and using my serger so often with decorative threads. And she said to me, wow, you really use your serger a lot. And I said, of course I do. I have it up with my sewing machine and I use it all the time. I'm always trying to dream up projects to use my serger and all those wonderful heavier decorative threads for my projects. I hope you enjoyed this instructional video on your new Babylock-Victory serger, and I hope you learned a lot from it. If you have any questions, feel free to call us at the store or drop by and see us. This machine is available in store only. So come by and see us. Thanks for watching and happy serging.